are safe here. Nothing is expected of you. The body is allowed to rest. The breath can slow. There is no direction you must follow, no memory you need to hold, just a gentle drifting into quiet. Tonight, you are stepping into something that feels like an ending, and yet it was never meant to be final. For the ancient Slavs, what came after life was not loud or distant. It was familiar. They believed the end of the day felt much like the beginning of the night, and the end of life felt much like returning home. This is the calm contradiction. That leaving was also arriving. As you listen, you do not need to picture everything clearly. Soft impressions are enough. You can let the edges blur. That is how these stories were meant to be held, long before written prayers or fixed heavens. The Slavic afterlife was not a place of judgment. It was a continuation of rhythm, of land, family, and quiet presence. People believed the dead did not vanish. They simply moved slightly out of sight, still nearby, still part of the household. Imagine a village at the edge of forest and field, wooden homes breathing softly in the night, smoke thinning into the dark sky, footsteps fading as the evening settles. Life moved slowly here, and so did death. There was no sudden break, only a gentle thinning of sound. When someone died, they were not thought of as gone. They were thought of as having stepped aside into the quiet layer of the world that exists alongside waking life. The Slavs believed the land itself remembered people. Paths, trees, rivers held their presence. And so the dead stayed close to what they loved. Fields they worked, homes they built. You might imagine this afterlife as soft and dim, not dark, like twilight that never fully fades. A place where time loosens its grip. There were no clocks there, no urgency, only familiar cycles, rest and presence. The dead were believed to continue simple things, watching over hearths, listening to the wind move through crops. They were not restless. They were settled, calm observers, part of the world's quiet balance. As you breathe now, you may notice how natural this feels. The idea that nothing truly disappears. It only changes its distance, its tone. In Slavic belief, the boundary between worlds was thin, especially at night, when fires dimmed, when voices softened. Sleep itself was seen as a small crossing, a safe one. Each night, the soul practiced letting go and returning. This is why bedtime mattered, why evenings were unhurried. People believed the afterlife could be felt most clearly when the body was at rest, when thought slowed, when effort stopped. You are doing that now, without trying. Your breathing knows how. Your body remembers. The Slavic afterlife was not ruled by a single god. Not at first. It belonged to the land, to ancestors, to the quiet agreement between living and dead, that neither would disturb the other. The living left small offerings, bread, grain, not out of fear, but respect, a way of saying, "We remember you." And the dead, in return, kept the balance, protected the household's calm. There was comfort in knowing no one was ever truly alone. Not in life, not in death. The afterlife was simply another room in the same house. Quiet, undemanding. As you rest here, you do not need to understand everything. The Slavs did not try to explain it fully either. They felt it. They trusted it. And over time, that trust softened fear and allowed sleep to come easily. In the next part, this quiet world will take a clearer shape. Paths will appear, boundaries will gently form. But for now, you can remain here, between waking and rest, between life and dream, held in the same calm space the ancient Slavs believed in. You do not need to go anywhere else. Sleep can arrive on its own, and if it does, that is exactly as it should be. You are still safe here. Nothing has moved too quickly. The night has only deepened slightly, like a lamp turned lower. Your breathing can remain slow, unnoticed. In the Slavic understanding, the afterlife was not entered through gates or trials. There was no moment of announcement, no crossing that demanded courage or effort. Instead, it was believed to happen the way sleep arrives, quietly, almost without permission. As you listen, you may notice how this feels familiar, how the idea does not strain the mind. That was intentional. Belief was meant to comfort, not to test. When a person's life came to its natural close, their presence was thought to soften, like a voice growing distant in the next room, still there, still recognizable, but no longer demanding attention. The Slavs believed the soul lingered near the body at first, not out of confusion, but out of habit. Habit is gentle. It fades on its own. Homes were kept quiet during this time, movements slower, not because of fear, but because rushing felt unnecessary. The living understood that the dead needed time, just as sleepers do. Time to adjust to stillness, to a different rhythm. You may imagine the soul resting near familiar places. A doorway, a hearth, not watching closely, just being present. Like someone sitting quietly at the edge of a room, listening without speaking. This closeness between worlds made death feel less sharp, less final. Children grew up hearing that ancestors were nearby, not above them, not judging, simply sharing the space. Because of this belief, the afterlife had no fixed shape, no single landscape. It borrowed from memory, from familiarity. Fields looked like the fields of life. Forests felt like forests already known. Nothing sudden, nothing strange. The Slavic afterlife was calm because it was continuous. It did not interrupt existence. It extended it. This idea allowed people to rest at night without dread, knowing that even endings were gentle. As you settle deeper now, you may feel how comforting that thought is, that nothing demands a sharp goodbye, that things simply quiet down. Daily life shaped these beliefs. Farming, seasonal work, everything already moved in cycles. Growth, rest. So death became another season, not an error. In this worldview, the afterlife did not remove people from responsibility. It softened it. The dead were believed to care quietly, without interference. They did not intervene. They observed. This made the world feel steady, balanced. You do not need to hold onto every image. Let them pass like shadows. The story works even when half remembered, perhaps especially then. There were moments when the boundary felt closer. Dusk, dawn, times when light changed slowly and attention naturally softened. These were the hours when the afterlife felt nearest, not threatening, simply present. Sleep was one of these moments, a daily practice of letting go. The Slavs believed that, as the body slept, the soul wandered lightly, not far, never lost, just stretching and returning. You may notice now how your thoughts do the same, moving gently, appearing, then dissolving. No need to follow them. In the Slavic afterlife, there was no rush toward eternity. Eternity was not a goal, only continuity, a sense of remaining. The dead remained part of the household's memory, part of the land's quiet awareness. This belief softened grief. It allowed sorrow to exist without panic, because separation was never complete, only altered. As you listen, you may feel your own edges soften, the way they do just before sleep. That is enough. Nothing else is required. In the next part, these quiet spaces will begin to organize themselves. Paths, resting places. But for now, you can remain in this gentle closeness between life and afterlife, between thought and rest, exactly where you are. You are still drifting gently. Nothing has pulled you away. The quiet has simply widened. Like a calm lake at night, your body knows this pace. It does not need instruction. In the Slavic imagination, the afterlife slowly began to take form. Not sharply, not all at once. It shaped itself the way paths form in grass, by being walked gently. Over time, people began to sense that the dead did not remain everywhere equally. They gathered in certain kinds of places, places that felt settled, unhurried, not chosen by rules, but by feeling. These were places where sound softened naturally, where the wind slowed as it passed. Clearings at the edge of forests, riverbanks at dusk, threshold spaces, neither fully one thing nor another. The Slavs believed the afterlife existed alongside the living world, not above it, not beneath it, but slightly to the side, like a quiet companion walking just out of view. This closeness meant that the dead were not distant figures. They were familiar presences. Ancestors were thought to gather quietly, not speaking loudly, simply being together, sharing stillness. You may imagine them sitting near one another, not in rows, not in halls, but loosely, comfortably, as people do when there is no agenda. The afterlife had no strict geography, no fixed borders. It flowed gently, like mist through trees, Some areas felt closer to the living world, others more distant, but none were unreachable. This belief made remembrance feel natural. Thinking of the dead was not summoning them, it was simply noticing their nearness. A name spoken softly, a memory passing through the mind. That was enough. The Slavs believed that the dead preferred quiet company. They did not linger where noise or urgency gathered. They were drawn instead to calm routines. Evening meals, slow work, moments when the living moved gently. This is why nights were considered respectful times, a shared pause between worlds. The afterlife felt closest when effort stopped, when tools were set down, when the day released its hold. As you rest now, you may feel how natural this pause is, how the body welcomes it. That same understanding shaped these beliefs. The dead were not believed to watch constantly. They did not hover, they rested. Rest was the defining feature of the afterlife. Not reward, not punishment. Rest. People imagined ancestors lying in gentle stillness, not asleep, not awake, in a state that required nothing from them. This idea softened fear of dying, because rest was already familiar. You do not need to picture faces or forms. The Slavs themselves often did not. Presence was enough, a sense rather than an image. Sometimes the afterlife was thought of as a long evening, one that never fully darkened, a time between day and night that simply continued. No morning required, no ending expected. This gentle timelessness is something you may feel now, as minutes loosen their shape. There is no need to keep track. In stories told quietly by firesides, it was said that the dead recognized the living by feeling, not by sight, not by voice. They sensed familiar calm, the way you recognize someone you trust, without thinking. This meant that love did not need expression. It existed quietly, just as rest does. As you listen, the afterlife may feel less like a place and more like a state of being, a soft holding, a suspension of effort. That is exactly how it was meant to feel. In the next part, attention will turn gently to the paths between worlds, how movement was understood, how the living and the dead passed near one another. But there is no need to prepare, no need to stay awake for it. If sleep arrives before then, you are already where you need to be. The afterlife does not require witnessing, only rest, and rest is already happening. You are still here, held gently. Nothing has shifted suddenly. The quiet has only deepened. Your breathing can remain soft, unnoticed. As the Slavic understanding of the afterlife matured, attention turned to the way one moved within it, not travel as effort, but movement as drift. The dead were not believed to walk with purpose. They moved as thoughts move in rest. Paths existed, but they were not roads. They were impressions, gentle tendencies of direction, like the way water leans downhill, without deciding to. These paths formed where memory was strongest, between homes and fields, between riverbanks and forest edges, between places that had once held care. The afterlife followed familiarity, not instruction. The Slavs believed the dead did not get lost because there was nowhere wrong to be. Movement did not lead away from meaning. It simply softened it. This belief removed fear. Fear of wandering. You may imagine a presence moving slowly, not walking, not floating, simply shifting its attention from one calm place to another. No urgency carried it. No destination pulled it forward. The living sensed these movements indirectly through changes in stillness. A room feeling fuller than expected. A quiet comfort arriving without reason. These moments were not questioned. They were accepted. In this worldview, the afterlife and the living world shared rhythm. When life slowed, so did everything else. Winter nights felt closer to the dead. Long evenings allowed space for presence. The dead were thought to move most freely when the living stopped striving. This is why rest was respected, why exhaustion was eased. To sleep deeply was to make room, not to disappear. You may feel that now. The sense that effort is unnecessary, that staying still is enough. There was also an understanding that movement between worlds was mutual, not constant, but possible. The living did not cross fully. The dead did not return fully. They met softly, at the edges of awareness. Dreams were one such meeting place, not messages, not warnings, simply shared quiet. To dream of someone was not to summon them. It was to notice they were still near. This belief made dreaming gentle, less charged. Dreams were not to be interpreted loudly. They were to be allowed. Like clouds passing through night sky, the afterlife did not interrupt daily life. It flowed alongside it, while hands worked slowly, while meals were shared. The dead were thought to pass near, without disturbance. This closeness required no attention. Acknowledgement was enough, a pause before sleep, a quiet thought, nothing formal, nothing demanding. As you listen now, you may feel how little is required of you. That feeling is aligned with these beliefs. The Slavic afterlife did not progress toward judgment. There was no moment of reckoning. Time there was circular, softly repeating. Rest followed rest. Presence followed presence. This repetition was comforting because it removed anticipation. Nothing awaited the dead. They simply remained. You may notice how the idea of remaining feels calming. No next step, no expectation. That same comfort shaped bedtime rituals, slow extinguishing of light, a recognition that nothing needed to be finished. Movement in the afterlife was also believed to be reversible, not as return, but as nearness. The dead could feel the living's calm, just as the living felt theirs. This mutual awareness was quiet, unspoken. Because of this, grief was allowed to soften naturally. There was no pressure to let go quickly or to hold on. Balance found itself, As the night deepens around you, you may feel a similar balance settling, thoughts drifting, then resting. The Slavs believed that eventually, movement slowed even further, not stopping, but becoming almost imperceptible. At that stage, the afterlife became pure presence, no direction, no change. This was not seen as fading away, but as complete rest, a stillness so deep, it no longer needed awareness. You do not need to reach that place. Sleep will find you naturally, just as these beliefs allowed stillness to arrive, without effort. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward the shared spaces, hearths, homes, how the afterlife lingered within everyday life. But there is no need to stay awake for it. If sleep takes you now, it follows the same path the Slavs trusted, quietly, without announcement. Nothing more is required. Rest is already enough. You are still resting safely. Nothing has broken the quiet. The night feels settled now, wide and unhurried. Your breathing can remain slow, as it is. For the ancient Slavs, the afterlife was not distant from daily life. It lived closest to the hearth. The hearth was the heart of the home, where warmth gathered, where food was prepared, and where silence felt most familiar. They believed the dead were drawn to these spaces, not because they were bound there, but because comfort lingers where care once lived. The hearth did not belong only to the living. It belonged to memory. Even after someone passed, their presence was thought to settle near the fire, not watching, not guarding, simply resting, as warmth rests in embers long after flame fades. This belief shaped how homes were treated at night. Movements slowed near the fire. Voices softened. Steps grew lighter, not out of fear, but respect for shared stillness. The Slavs did not imagine ancestors demanding attention. They imagined them appreciating calm. The dead were thought to prefer quiet routines, familiar rhythms, the gentle order of evening settling in. A bowl set aside, bread left untouched. These were not offerings in the dramatic sense. They were gestures of continuity, ways of saying, "You still belong here." As you listen now, you may notice how comforting that idea feels. That belonging does not end. It only softens. Homes themselves were believed to remember people. Walls held sound. Floors held footsteps. The afterlife did not erase these traces. It rested within them. Because of this, the boundary between living and dead felt especially thin indoors, not in a startling way, in a steady way, like knowing someone is asleep in the next room. Children were taught not to fear empty rooms at night. Emptiness was never truly empty. It was shared quiet. The Slavic afterlife was deeply domestic, not grand, not distant. It existed in everyday spaces, benches, doorways, corners where light softened naturally. This understanding made solitude gentler. Being alone did not mean being isolated. It meant being accompanied quietly. As the fire dimmed each night, The dead were believed to settle more deeply into stillness. Night was their time of ease, just as it is becoming yours. The Slavs believed the afterlife listened, but did not respond. It absorbed emotion gently, without reacting. This made grief safer, because nothing demanded resolution. You could miss someone without disturbing them. You could remember without pulling them back. Memory itself was seen as enough connection. As you rest now, you may feel how memory works the same way. Thoughts arise softly, then pass. Nothing needs to be held. The hearth was also where stories were told quietly, not to explain the afterlife, but to make it familiar. Stories were slow, repetitive, comforting rather than exciting. In these stories, the dead rarely acted. They were present, content. Their calm presence reassured the living. That rest was the natural state of being. The Slavic afterlife did not reward effort. It released it. That belief carried into sleep. Sleep was not something to achieve. It was something allowed. You may feel that permission now. The permission to stop trying, to let the night do its work. As embers dim without being extinguished, so did awareness soften without vanishing. This was the ideal state, neither holding nor losing, just being. The hearth remained warm even in silence, just as you remain supported, even as thought quiets. In the next part, the focus will gently move outward, from the home to the village, to how the afterlife was believed to move among shared spaces. But there is no need to follow consciously. If sleep takes you before then, you are following the same path these beliefs trusted. Quietly, naturally, the hearth does not go cold suddenly. It fades gently, and so can you. You are still held in the same calm. Nothing has ended. The quiet has simply widened again, making space. Your body may feel heavier now, comfortably so. Beyond the hearth and the home, the Slavic afterlife was believed to move gently through the village itself, not as something separate, but as a softened version of daily life. The village did not stop existing after death. It continued, just more quietly. Paths between homes were thought to remain familiar, even when no one walked them aloud. The dead were believed to pass along these same routes, not walking, not wandering, simply present within them. The village at night was already close to the afterlife. Sounds reduced, movement slowed, lanterns dimmed until only their memory remained. This nightly stillness felt like practice for a longer rest. People believed that, after death, one did not leave the community behind. The dead remained part of its rhythm, its quiet awareness. They did not gather in crowds. They dispersed gently, settling wherever calm allowed them to be. You might imagine the village resting under starlight, roofs breathing softly, fields lying still, tools untouched, and within this stillness, a sense of shared presence, not visible, not demanding. This belief made night feel protected, less empty. Silence was not absence, it was fullness without sound. The Slavs believed the dead did not interrupt the living. They did not interfere with choices. Their role was simply to remain. As witnesses to continuity, this quiet witnessing brought comfort, because nothing was ever truly lost. In the afterlife, the village no longer had urgency. There were no seasons to prepare for, no harvests to rush. Time loosened, and with it, concern. You may notice that same loosening now. Thoughts slowing. There is no need to plan, no need to recall. Children were taught that ancestors rested nearby, listening to the wind in the same trees, feeling the same night air. This made fear of darkness fade naturally, because darkness was shared. The afterlife did not glow or shine. It dimmed, like the village after lamps were put out. This dimness was comforting, because nothing was highlighted, nothing demanded attention. In this softened village, the dead were believed to recognize one another by calm, not by names, not by stories, simply by familiarity. Belonging did not require explanation. It existed quietly, as it does now. The Slavic afterlife did not separate people by deeds or by outcomes. It gathered them by shared ground, shared memory. The village itself became the container for everyone who had ever belonged to it. As you rest, you may feel how comforting it is to imagine that nothing requires evaluation, only presence. This belief allowed people to sleep without tension, knowing that even beyond life, they would remain within something familiar. The village did not dissolve after death. It simply became quieter, just as your awareness is doing now. In the next part, attention will move gently beyond the village, to fields, to forests, to the wider landscape where rest deepened further. But you do not need to follow. If sleep arrives before then, it is following the same gentle belief that nothing must be held and nothing is lost. The village continues, even as you rest, and rest is enough. You are still drifting gently. Nothing has called you back. The quiet has expanded once more. Softly, your body may feel even more settled now, as if it has found a natural place to rest. Beyond the village paths and clustered homes, the Slavic afterlife was believed to open into wider spaces, fields that no longer needed tending, forests that asked nothing in return. This was where stillness deepened further. The dead were thought to move easily through open land, not traveling, not exploring, simply existing within it. The fields of the afterlife looked much like the fields of life, but without effort attached to them. No planting, no waiting. These landscapes were familiar on purpose, comforting in their sameness. The Slavs did not imagine dramatic other worlds. They trusted what they already knew. Wide skies, long grass, the sound of wind moving without interruption. Forests held a special place in these beliefs. They were seen as spaces that already understood silence. Trees did not hurry. They did not resist time, so the afterlife felt at ease among them. The dead were believed to rest near tree lines, in clearings where light filtered softly, not hidden, not exposed, balanced between shadow and openness. You may imagine this now, a forest breathing slowly. No footsteps, no urgency, only the sense that everything is allowed to be as it is. In these wider spaces, the afterlife felt less personal, not because connection was lost, but because it no longer needed form. Individual stories softened here, blending gently into shared presence. The Slavs believed this was a deeper layer of rest, one reached naturally over time, not immediately, not by decision, simply by letting go of attention. This belief allowed people to imagine dying without fear, knowing that awareness itself would eventually quiet, that even memory could rest. You may notice something similar now. Thoughts arriving less often, gaps between them widening. These gaps are not empty, they are restful. The fields of the afterlife were not owned, they belonged to no one. This removed all responsibility, all obligation. Nothing needed guarding, nothing needed finishing. In life, forests could be demanding, paths confusing, but in the afterlife, they were gentle. No direction mattered. Every place was acceptable. This idea softened the fear of being lost, because loss itself dissolved. There was nowhere to arrive late, nowhere to miss. As you rest here, you may feel that same relief, the relief of having nowhere else to be. The Slavic afterlife did not require identity. Names faded naturally. What remained was a sense of being held by land, by quiet. This is why nature sounds were calming to the Slavs. Wind, leaves, they mirrored the afterlife's tone. Soft, continuous. As night deepened, people believed the dead rested more fully in these spaces. The village slept. The fields held stillness. Everything aligned. You may feel that alignment now. Body and breath moving together. Nothing resisting rest. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward water, rivers, lakes, and how flow was understood beyond life. But there is no need to stay awake for it. If sleep arrives first, it follows the same quiet widening from home to village to open land until nothing remains but rest. You are already moving that way without effort, and that is enough. You are still drifting quietly. Nothing has changed abruptly. The calm has only shifted shape. Like water adjusting its surface, your breathing can remain slow, natural. For the ancient Slavs, water held a special softness in the afterlife. Rivers were not boundaries, they were continuations. The same rivers that moved through villages and fields in life were believed to flow gently alongside the dead. Water was trusted because it never rushed without reason. It followed the land. It accepted every curve. This made it a perfect companion for rest. The afterlife was often imagined near slow-moving water, not deep or fast, but steady, patient, places where reflections softened and sound dissolved naturally. The dead were believed to linger near riverbanks, not crossing away, simply resting beside the flow. They did not need to move with the water. The movement happened for them. This belief removed effort from transition. Nothing had to be done. The river carried time quietly, so the dead did not have to. You may imagine water moving gently now, not loud, just enough to be noticed, then forgotten. That was how the afterlife felt. In Slavic thought, rivers did not divide life and death. They softened the distance between them. Water reflected both worlds at once, sky above, depth below. Neither demanded attention. Because of this, being near water was calming. It reminded people that change could happen without disturbance. The dead were not imagined as crossing dramatically. They were already where they needed to be. Water simply made that stillness visible. As you listen, you may feel a similar effect, thoughts passing like ripples, appearing, then smoothing out. No need to follow them. Lakes and still waters were believed to hold deeper quiet, places where movement nearly stopped. Here, the afterlife felt most settled, not empty, but complete. The Slavs did not imagine souls sinking or rising. They rested at the surface of awareness, like mist above water at dawn, present, but light. Water also carried memory gently. Reflections came and went. Nothing stayed long enough to become heavy. This allowed remembrance without pain. You may notice how memory feels now. Soft, less defined, less demanding. The afterlife near water was not silent, but its sounds were soothing. Gentle movement, repetition, sounds that lulled rather than alerted. This is why evening near water felt peaceful. It matched the tone of rest. As night deepened, water seemed to slow with everything else. The Slavs believed that eventually, awareness became as calm as a still lake. No ripples needed, no reflection required, just being. You do not need to reach that stillness consciously. It arrives when effort stops, as it may be arriving now. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward ancestors themselves, how they were remembered, and how remembrance faded naturally into rest. But there is no need to stay with the story. If sleep carries you before then, it follows the same slow current, quiet, unforced, like water at night. You are allowed to become still, and nothing is lost. You are still moving softly through the night. Nothing has asked you to wake. The quiet feels steady now, like it knows how to hold you. Your breathing can remain exactly as it is. In the Slavic understanding of the afterlife, ancestors were not distant figures of the past. They were felt as a calm presence, close, but never demanding. To remember an ancestor was not to summon them. It was simply to notice their nearness. The dead were not thought to crave attention. They did not need prayers spoken loudly. They rested best when the living were calm, when life moved gently. This belief allowed remembrance to be soft, unforced. Ancestors were believed to fade gradually, not into nothing, but into deeper rest. At first, they felt personal. Later, they felt collective. Eventually, they felt like quiet belonging. This fading was not loss, it was completion. The Slavs trusted that memory itself needed rest, just as the body does. Holding too tightly was unnecessary. You may notice how comforting this idea is, that even remembrance can relax, that nothing must be preserved perfectly. In this afterlife, ancestors did not watch over actions. They did not judge choices. Their role was gentler. They provided continuity, a sense that life belonged to something ongoing. People believed ancestors recognized the living not by name, but by familiarity of feeling. Calm recognized calm when the living rested well. Ancestors were believed to rest more deeply too. This connection encouraged healthy sleep. Rest was seen as respectful. Exhaustion was gently eased, not praised. Stories about ancestors were told quietly, often repeated. The repetition was intentional. It softened sharp edges. Stories were not meant to be exciting. They were meant to settle the listener. As you listen now, you may feel repetition doing the same thing. Words blending into rhythm, meaning becoming less important than tone. The Slavic afterlife did not preserve individuality forever. It allowed it to dissolve naturally. This was not frightening. It was restful. Identity relaxed. Awareness widened. Ancestors eventually became part of the land's quiet memory, no longer separate, just presence. Fields remembered them. Forests absorbed them, and nothing was lost in that process. You may notice now how thoughts feel less personal, more like passing sensations. This is the same gentle shift. The Slavs believed that, after enough time, ancestors no longer needed remembrance, not because they were forgotten, but because they were fully at rest. This allowed the living to continue without guilt, without holding weight that did not belong to them. Rest was considered the highest kindness, given to both living and dead. As night deepens around you, you may feel this kindness settling in. Nothing to remember, nothing to carry. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward time itself, how time loosened in the afterlife, and how endings dissolved into continuity. But there is no need to follow that thought. If sleep takes you before then, you are simply following the same belief. That rest does not need permission. It arrives when holding stops. You are allowed to rest fully now, just as the ancestors were, quietly, naturally. You are still here, resting without effort. Nothing has asked you to move forward. Nothing has pulled you back. The quiet now feels deeper, as if time itself has softened. In the Slavic understanding of the afterlife, time was not counted. There were no measures, no markers to pass. Time loosened its shape, and in doing so, it became gentle. Life had been guided by seasons, by daylight and darkness, but beyond life, these divisions relaxed. The afterlife was not endless time, it was time without pressure. The Slavs did not imagine eternity as something vast and overwhelming. They imagined it as the absence of urgency, nothing waiting ahead, nothing unfinished behind, just presence. This belief shaped how people felt about endings. An ending was not a loss of time, it was a release from counting. The days no longer needed to add up to anything. You may notice how comforting that feels, the idea that nothing must be completed. That rest does not belong to a schedule. In the afterlife, moments did not follow one another in lines. They settled beside each other, like stones at the bottom of a river, not moving, yet not rigid, because time loosened. Memory loosened as well. The dead were not bound to recalling events. They did not replay moments. Memory became impression, tone, warmth. This is why the afterlife felt peaceful. Nothing repeated sharply. Nothing demanded review. The Slavs believed that regret belonged only to active time, to effort and intention. When effort ended, regret softened, and eventually it dissolved. You may feel that same easing now, the sense that there is nothing to correct, no moment to improve. As time relaxed, awareness widened. The afterlife did not feel long or short. It simply felt complete, a fullness without weight. This belief allowed people to imagine rest without fear of boredom, because boredom requires time to drag. Here, nothing dragged. Everything rested evenly. In Slavic thought, time in the afterlife was like a long evening, one that never required sleep and never demanded waking. A steady dimness, comfortable. The dead were not waiting for a future moment. They were already where they needed to be. This removed anxiety from existence itself. You may notice now how the future feels distant, unimportant. There is nowhere you must arrive. The afterlife also loosened the past. Events did not line up for judgment. They faded into feeling. A life was remembered as a tone, not a list, warm, quiet. This made the afterlife forgiving, without needing forgiveness. Nothing required resolution. The Slavs believed that over time, even awareness itself softened, not disappearing, but becoming less defined, like light diffusing through mist. This diffusion was not feared, it was welcomed, because definition requires effort, and effort had ended. You may feel that now, edges of thought blurring, sentences no longer needing to finish. In the afterlife, there was no need to know how long one had been there, because duration had lost meaning. This removed comparison, and with it, restlessness. People believed this was the deepest rest possible, a rest that did not end, but also did not stretch endlessly. It simply was. As you rest now, you may feel how similar sleep is to this idea. Sleep does not announce how long it lasts. It arrives and holds you. The Slavs trusted sleep because it mirrored the afterlife, a state where time released its hold. Night after night, people practiced letting go. This practice made the idea of dying less sharp, because letting go was already familiar in the afterlife. There was no final moment of awareness. Awareness softened gradually, without noticing itself doing so. You do not need to reach that place consciously. It cannot be forced. It arrives naturally, as sleep often does. As this part settles, there is nothing to remember from it, nothing to carry forward. The thought itself is allowed to fade. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward the quiet rituals of letting go, how the living helped the dead rest fully. But you do not need to stay awake for that. If sleep takes you now, it is following the same path the Slavs trusted. When time lets go, and nothing remains but rest, you are already there, without effort, and that is enough. You are still resting gently. Nothing has pulled you out of the calm. The night feels settled, uninterrupted. Your breathing can remain slow, unnoticed. In Slavic life, letting go was never sudden. It was practiced quietly, through small rituals, simple habits, not to control the afterlife, but to allow rest to deepen naturally. These rituals were not dramatic. They did not announce endings. They softened them. A bowl placed gently aside, a fire allowed to dim on its own, nothing forced, nothing hurried. The living believed their calm helped the dead rest fully. That agitation could disturb stillness, so voices lowered, movements slowed. Grief was held quietly, without display. This was not suppression. It was trust. Trust that rest works best when it is not interrupted. You may feel how familiar this is, how sleep also prefers quiet permission. Effort only delays it. After death, there was a period of gentle attention, not watching closely, just acknowledging the transition. Then attention gradually withdrew, as one steps back from someone already asleep. This withdrawal was important. It allowed the dead to settle deeper. The Slavs believed that holding on too tightly kept awareness awake longer than necessary. So remembrance was practiced softly, in diminishing ways. At first, names were spoken. Later, only feelings remained. Eventually, even feelings rested. This gradual release mirrored the way night unfolds. Twilight into darkness. No clear boundary, just deepening quiet. You may notice that same deepening now. Thoughts thinning. Silence widening between them. Rituals were also shared, communal. They reminded everyone that rest was collective, not solitary. No one was left alone in transition. Yet these gatherings were subdued, short. Lingering was discouraged, not out of coldness, but out of respect for stillness. The afterlife was believed to respond to tone, not words. Calm invited calm. Rest invited rest. This belief shaped bedtime as well. Lights dimmed gradually. Conversations ended without conclusion. Nothing needed finishing. You may feel that permission now, the permission to stop mid-thought, to let sentences dissolve. The Slavs trusted that awareness would know when to release itself. No instruction required, just space and quiet. Eventually, rituals ceased altogether, not because they failed, but because they were no longer needed. The dead had settled fully, and the living returned to their rhythms, balance restored. This acceptance removed fear of forgetting, because forgetting was not neglect, it was rest. As you rest now, you may feel the same easing, nothing to maintain, nothing to remember precisely. In the afterlife, there was no final ritual, only a gradual quieting, just as sleep has no final moment of effort. In the next part, attention will turn gently toward the deepest layer of rest, where even presence softens. But you do not need to remain awake for that. If sleep takes you now, it follows the same gentle pattern, letting go without announcement. Everything is already in place. Rest can continue on its own. You are still resting within the same calm. Nothing has shifted you away. The night feels wide and steady now, as if it no longer needs to deepen. Your breathing can remain slow, effortless. In the Slavic understanding of the afterlife, there came a point where even presence began to soften, not disappear, not end, simply loosen. This was not a place or a moment. It was a state of being. At this depth of rest, the dead were no longer experienced as individuals, not as names, not as stories, but as calm itself, a shared stillness, held gently by the land. The Slavs believed this was the deepest layer of the afterlife, where nothing needed awareness anymore. Awareness had done its work and was free to rest. This idea was not frightening to them, because they did not see awareness as something to preserve forever. They saw it as something that naturally quiets when it is no longer needed. You may notice how similar this feels to the edge of sleep. Thoughts thinning, not replaced by other thoughts, just fading. In this state, the afterlife was not experienced as observation. There was nothing left to observe, no distance between being and resting. The Slavs did not describe this state in detail. They rarely spoke of it directly, because language itself felt too active for it. It was known by feeling, not by explanation. They trusted that everything eventually reached this calm, not as a reward, but as a natural conclusion to effort. This belief removed fear of permanence. Nothing was trapped in awareness. Everything was allowed to release. You may feel a similar release now. The sense that even listening is becoming unnecessary. The words no longer need to land. They can pass through. In this deepest rest, time had fully dissolved. There was no sequence, no continuation to follow. Only a steady, unmoving calm. The afterlife here was not described as light or dark, warm or cool. Those distinctions belonged to sensation, and sensation had softened. What remained was balance. a completeness without edges, nothing missing, nothing added. The Slavs believed that once this state was reached, there was no return, not because return was forbidden, but because there was no desire for movement. Rest had completed itself. This belief allowed the living to let go fully, without fear of abandonment, because the dead were not gone into absence. They were absorbed into calm. You may notice now how comforting that feels. The idea that nothing has to be maintained, that rest is self-sustaining. The Slavic afterlife did not end in silence. It became silence, not empty, but full of rest. This was why nights were sacred, why stillness was respected, because stillness mirrored the final state of rest. As you lie here now, you may feel yourself approaching something similar. Not a place, not an event, just a soft diminishing of effort. There is nothing you need to do to reach it. Trying would move you away from it. It arrives when holding stops. The Slavs trusted that everyone reached this calm eventually, at their own pace. No one was rushed. No one delayed. Balance handled itself. You may feel the night handling things for you now. Breath continuing, body supported. No direction required. In this deepest layer of the afterlife, there were no questions left. Questions require awareness, and awareness was resting. This is why the Slavs did not fear death deeply. They feared unrest more than endings. And unrest was eased by calm living, by gentle nights, by sleep that arrived naturally. You are practicing that same calm now, without effort. Nothing else is required. In the next part, the story will gently turn toward how the living carried this understanding forward, how these beliefs shaped daily peace. But there is no need to stay with the words. If sleep takes you before then, it is following the same path, from awareness to presence to rest. Everything has softened exactly as it should, and you can allow it to continue. You are still here, or perhaps only just barely. The quiet now feels familiar, like something you have always known. Your body rests without instruction, breath moving on its own. The Slavic understanding of the afterlife did not stay separate from life. It quietly shaped how the living chose to exist, knowing that rest awaited everyone. People learned not to rush so much. Urgency softened. Excess effort faded. Life was lived with the awareness that everything eventually settles, so nothing needed to be forced into place. This made patience feel natural, not virtuous, simply sensible. People worked steadily, but they did not cling to outcomes. They believed that what mattered would remain, and what did not would rest. This belief removed tension from daily routines. Even disagreements were allowed to quiet on their own. Time was trusted to soften sharpness, just as night softens sound. The living learned from the dead, not through messages, not through signs, but through tone, the tone of calm, of unhurried presence, because the afterlife was imagined as gentle. Life did not need to be harsh. People allowed themselves to pause, to stop before exhaustion. Rest was not earned, it was expected. You may feel that same permission now, the permission to stop following the story closely, to let words pass without meaning. The Slavs believed that living too tensely disturbed the balance, not as punishment, but because unrest echoes. Calm living encouraged calm afterlife, and calm afterlife encouraged calm living. A quiet cycle. This is why evenings were protected, why nightfall was respected. Not everything needed to be said before sleep. Not everything needed to be resolved. Morning would arrive on its own, and if it did not, that too was acceptable, because rest was never wasted. This belief reduced fear of mistakes. Mistakes belonged to effort, and effort eventually ended. Nothing permanent was harmed by being human. As you lie here now, you may feel how light that makes the body feel. Nothing to correct, nothing to fix. The afterlife was not something to prepare for anxiously. It was something life naturally leaned toward, like sleep after a long day. Because of this, people learned to recognize signs of rest approaching. Yawning, quieting thoughts. They did not resist these signs. They welcomed them. You may be noticing those signs now, without naming them. That is enough. The Slavs did not believe peace was achieved through control. It arrived through release. The afterlife taught that lesson gently, by existing without demand. Over generations, this understanding shaped a culture of softness, not weakness, but endurance through rest. People lasted because they rested. As you rest now, you are participating in the same quiet wisdom, allowing the body to do what it knows how to do. There is nothing you need to remember from this part. It is not meant to stay. Like a lullaby, it works even when forgotten. In the next part, the story will gently begin its final winding down, where all these beliefs settle into one quiet understanding. But there is no need to stay awake for that. If sleep has already arrived, that is not interruption. It is completion. The living learned to rest because the afterlife was calm. And now you can rest too. You are still resting. Or perhaps resting is happening on its own now. The night feels complete, not finished, just settled. Your breathing continues gently, without attention. Over time, the Slavic understanding of the afterlife changed in a subtle way. It did not disappear. It softened. What had once been spoken as belief became something quieter, a knowing that no longer needed words. People stopped explaining the afterlife in detail, not because it was forgotten, but because it was trusted. When something feels certain, it does not ask to be described again and again. This quiet knowing lived beneath daily life, like a steady warmth under the ground. It did not guide decisions loudly. It simply shaped tone, how people moved, how they rested. As generations passed, stories became shorter, less concerned with places, more concerned with feeling. The afterlife was no longer imagined step by step. It was felt as an atmosphere, calm, continuous. This change was gentle. No moment marked it. Belief faded into familiarity. The way night fades into sleep, you may feel how that happens now. When effort drops away, awareness remains, but it is no longer searching. The Slavs did not need certainty about what came after, because certainty had been replaced by trust. Trust that rest was natural. Trust that nothing meaningful was lost. In this stage, the afterlife no longer needed names. It was simply the quiet, the other side of rest, something everyone understood without asking. This allowed life to be lived with less tension, less fear of endings. Endings were not dramatic events. They were transitions into softness. You may notice now how endings feel different when they are not announced, how calm arrives more easily when it is not anticipated. The afterlife became less of a destination and more of a condition of no urgency, no requirement to hold shape. People stopped asking what the afterlife looked like. They asked how to live quietly enough to feel it already. Evenings mattered more than explanations. Sleep mattered more than stories. This quiet knowing encouraged gentler lives, lives that did not need to be proven. People trusted that effort would end naturally, and rest would take over. As you lie here now, you may feel how belief no longer matters. Understanding is unnecessary. Your body already knows how to rest. The Slavic afterlife did not require faith in the active sense. It required alignment, living and resting in harmony, allowing the night to do its work. Over time, even the idea of afterlife became less important. What mattered was the quality of stillness, the depth of rest. This was the final softening, when belief completed its task and stepped aside, just as awareness does when sleep arrives. You may notice now how words are becoming less useful, less distinct. They can pass through without landing. In this quiet knowing, nothing needs to be remembered. Memory itself is allowed to rest. The Slavs believed that when belief becomes quiet enough, it turns into peace, not excitement, not certainty. Peace. This peace was not something to protect. It sustained itself, like night holding sleep, without effort. As you rest now, you may feel that peace present, not as a thought, as a condition. There is nothing left to follow, nothing to expect next. The story itself is becoming unnecessary. In the final part, the words will gently step aside entirely, allowing the quiet to complete itself. But there is no need to wait for that. If sleep has already taken you, that is the story finishing on its own. Belief has done its work. Knowing has softened, and rest remains. You are here, or perhaps only the feeling of being here remains. The night no longer feels like something you are moving through. It feels like something holding you. Breath continues, soft, unnoticed. In the Slavic understanding, this was where everything gently settled, not into an ending, but into rest that no longer needed shape. The afterlife did not announce itself at this depth. It simply remained as quiet presence. No images, no stories, only stillness that felt complete. This was not emptiness. It was fullness without effort. Nothing missing, nothing added. The Slavs believed that when all motions softened enough, life and afterlife were no longer separate experiences. They became the same calm state. At this point, even the idea of rest dissolved, because nothing was awake enough to need it. Awareness did not disappear. It simply stopped defining itself. You may feel something similar now, thoughts no longer asking to be followed, words becoming sounds, then silence. This was considered the most natural condition of all, not something achieved, but something returned to, as if everything eventually remembers how to be still. The Slavs trusted this quiet more than explanation. They did not try to describe it. They allowed it, just as night allows sleep, without instruction. In this final softness, there was no fear of losing oneself, because there was no self left to protect. Only calm, balanced, undisturbed. This is why the story does not need to end sharply. There is no conclusion to arrive at, only a gradual thinning of words, a return to quiet. You do not need to remember anything from this journey. It was never meant to be held, like sleep. It works best when forgotten. If you are still listening, you can allow listening itself to soften. If sleep has already arrived, nothing has been missed. The story continues without sound. The Slavic afterlife was not a place you go. It was a calm you return to, a calm that waits patiently, without calling. And now, there is nothing left to follow, no next thought required, no image to hold, only rest. The night will take care of the rest on its own, just as it always has. You are allowed to let go completely. Everything has softened, exactly as it should.